I was 8 years old. I remember going into the local record store, asking the guy behind the counter saying, hey, I want to listen to some heavy metal. Can you recommend me something? I remember him pulling out this Metallica, Ride the Lightning, started playing it. It starts with Fight Fire with Fire, and then it just blasts into the heavy stuff, unleashing on my parents' record collection, listening to Dark Side of the Moon, and being really transported on the journey. There's always been that sort of scent within me of being a bit of an outsider. I didn't really fit in, was feeling very frustrated. Learned about the concept of masking, and then sort of thinking about it a bit more. I'm like, have I been doing this? Understanding of anything to do with autism and neurodivergence, hearing stereotypes and not really thinking too much about it. I read some stuff about it, and then I was like, hey, kind of relatable. I'm walking past a construction site. It's something like, ding, like that bothers me because it's sort of like out of my control. Death metal band called Adrenochrome. This was the 2000s. There was a lot of that metalcore sort of stuff. I'm being a show pony. You know, I'm jumping around like a lunatic. But it's just what feels natural to me when I'm playing that kind of music. I have a bit of pride as a musician, you know. I don't want to be seen as like incompetent. We opened for a few bands, Bongzilla, Conan, Weed Eater, Windhand, a lot of sludgy stoner doom sort of. Don't get too caught up on other people's concepts of rules or standards. They may not apply to you, even though you may think that that's what you're supposed to do. For me, being as prepared as possible is the best way to manage anxiety on stage. Can't even imagine a life without having this obsession. I kind of just assume everyone thinks I'm weird, you know, so.
Today we're talking to Sam Leamy, a music wizard in Wellington, New Zealand, and trust us, he does a lot of cool stuff. He's the drummer for a band called After the Flesh. He also creates wild and explosive sound with groups like Thoughts Explode Through Skulls, Opium Eater, and Spork. He even crafts spooky nightmare sounds with Opiate Sleeper, and he's also DJ Doran on the anger management show live on Radioactive 88.6 FM. Sam's not just a performer, he's a neurodivergent brainiac too. He studied at Victoria University School of Music, where he earned a bachelor's degree of music in composition, a double major in instrumental music and sonic arts, and a master of fine arts in film scoring. This guy lives and breathes music, and today he is here to tell us all about his musical journey and how he used his special interest in music navigating his autism journey. By the way, don't forget to hit that follow or subscribe button to help people with the same interest find us. It means a lot to me, and thank you.
I am Sam. I was born in the UK. Mother is English, father's a Kiwi. I'm a middle child, so older brother, younger sister, a couple of years each way. Came to New Zealand when I was about 4, went back to the UK when I was about 8 or 9, came back here when I was 12, my 12th birthday actually, I remember that. So I guess my childhood was uprooted a fair bit, you know, backwards and forwards. Got into music from a very young age. Toddler. I can't even really remember when it started, but yeah, it's never stopped. It's always been the obsession. Okay. And yeah.
When did you first find out your interest in music?
Do remember have sort of little snippets of memories of when I was about 4 years old and listening to my parents' records and just being really just fascinated by it. Yeah, so I guess for me it feels like it's just always been there. Yeah, I can't really remember a starting point.
What sort of records have your parents been listening to?
Well, I specifically remember actually going to, the memory I have, the earliest musical memory I guess I have is going to my parents' friend's house with them, and then he had records of the Stranglers, and for some reason I was just really taken by that. Yeah, like 4 years old, and I can remember it's time to go home, but I just kept wanting to listen to the records. My mother has an amusing anecdote of being at the beach, where like on a family holiday, and there's a Strangler song with some somewhat rude lyrics in it, and apparently I was like building sandcastles and sort of just singing like Leamy, fuck ya, like not really knowing what any of those words meant at the time, you know. But
yeah. With your journey, is it coming from that? And can you talk to me about your musical journey in terms of listening to Stranglers and going through your musical journey?
Yeah, throughout primary school, I was just really just interested in music. I can remember unleashing on my parents' record collection. Can have particular memories of things like listening to Dark Side of the Moon and being really transported on the journey of the journey aspect of the music. Really sort of just felt very powerful to me from a very young age. And like things like
if we are going to being a neurodivergent person, is there a moment in time when you were growing up and you feel like you are seeing the word differently, but you kind of don't know what it is?
Yeah, I think there's always been that sort of sense within me of outsiderness, you know, like being a bit of an outsider. Like I didn't really fit in at primary school. I mean, at that point, I had no idea of what neurodivergent was. I just knew that I was different. My parents, this is the 90s, like I said. So I think,
it's like new.
The awareness of it wasn't really like what it is now, you know. Like I've had conversations with my mother, and like they hadn't even sort of considered that sort of thing. They just knew that I was a weird kid, but didn't really think too much of it, you know. Really struggled with making friends at that age. I actually, it's quite interesting. It was when I became a teenager, and that's when people were kind of starting to get more into music and stuff, I felt, and that's when I started to make friends. So it was all kind of almost felt like it was connected to that, you know. It's like sort of other people were sort of getting interested into this thing which I'd been obsessed with since I was a toddler, you know.
Right. And what sort of spectrum are you?
I've got an autism diagnosis that came much later.
When you say much later, when was it?
Like within the last 3 years, actually. Yeah, I got my diagnosis in 2021. Yeah, so 3.5 years ago. But it was something that I'd sort of been reading up on. I think I sort of started to think about it maybe from my mid-20s. And then it was something where I'd sort of, I guess, without the knowledge, I'd sort of only really thought of it in terms of the stereotypes, which didn't really necessarily apply to me. I'm not really a maths genius or anything like that, you know, like.
But music is kind of your thing.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Math, for me personally, math is music.
My initial sort of understanding of anything to do with autism and neurodivergence, it was really colored by not really, just like hearing stereotypes and not really thinking too much about it. But then eventually, I can't really remember what point it was, but I had read some stuff about it, and then I was like, hey, wait, this actually feels kind of relatable. And the more I read about it, I was like, okay, there's something here. And then I can think of other people who I'm related to, like people in my own family, and I'm like, I think this applies to more than just me, you know. Yeah, eventually I just felt like I want to get a diagnosis, you know.
What's the turning point? I just want to know what's the turning point, like when you realize like, okay, I feel like I'm different. So what's the turning point for you, like to bring yourself up into a diagnosis?
I think I just was feeling very frustrated about being misunderstood. That's something that's always been kind of part of my psyche. I actually can remember I was in a relationship with somebody, and I'd sort of talked about this sort of thing, and they were kind of a bit dismissive about that sort of thing, and it kind of somehow became a really sticking point with that relationship falling out, and I guess at that point in time, it just suddenly felt really important to me to get this diagnosis, because I was like, I feel like I'm getting misunderstood to the point where people aren't believing me when I'm sort of talking about my real life experiences and stuff. And and from then on, I kind of just really sort of became interested in pursuing that. It took it was quite a challenge to get the diagnosis. I got it through the Victoria University Psych Clinic.
Is that the autism clinic? Autism clinic something? Or is it a different clinic?
No, it was just like I can't remember specifically, but it was just the psychology department at Victoria University. They had kind of advertised doing diagnosis for autism, or I think I heard about it from someone else who had gone through it. Yeah, I'd spoken to my GP and they'd sort of given me a referral. Nothing happened through the public system. I think this is a pretty common sort of thing. Yeah. Feels like, it's just a very under-resourced and high demand system. And then I kind of I heard from somebody else about the university psych department, and I contacted them. They sort of gave me we're very full for the moment, sorry. And I kind of just decided to be really persistent, and eventually they accepted it, and I got went to several appointments. It was actually really rigorous. I think it must have been about 10 hours of interviews I went through.
10 hours?
Yeah, it was really...
But in serious? Like,
Let's
talk 10 hours.
No. It was over the space of like about 3 or 4 months, and I was going to like weekly appointments and stuff. And I think in a way, I actually really think that was a good way, because it felt very thorough, and I kind of was discovering things about myself as I was going through it as well, and it felt like they were like, I think because the way it was set up was that it was like PhD students doing that. I don't really know the full details of it, but and then I came out with the diagnosis. It was October 2021.
Do you remember when you were a child, if you're up to like cars, aligning cars?
Lining things up?
Lining things.
Yeah, I don't think I was lining up toy cars and stuff like that. There are definitely things that I remember that definitely seem like autistic traits, just like sensory issues and stuff like that, like real fussy eater, but textural. Yeah. This is when I was a child. There's
a but there. You were listening to heavy music and you don't have any sensory issues with loud noise. I mean, it's loud, it's not noise, it's music.
Yeah.
In terms of like heavy metal and stuff, you didn't get like that sensory of...
And that's different. Like I get bugged by sort of some environmental sort of, like say if I'm walking past a construction site and then suddenly something like ding, like that bothers me, because it's sort of like out of my control in a way, I guess, and it's like sort of random and sort of you're not sort of, it's not an immersive environment,
Right.
I feel like there's I can't really quite explain it, but
there's a difference with like listening to music when it's like a stanza and a chorus and stanza and a chorus, you know what I mean? Like versus bang, like what the...
or sort of just I don't really know how I can explain why it works that way, but for me, like I can blast music really loud and I love it, like I can have it like massively loud music and it's just great, but then I hear somebody talking on their cell phone through speakerphone, and I'm like, oh, that sounds horrible, you know, like, yeah, like, and I don't really have an explanation for that, but it's...
The only reason I was asking, so it's not the same across all the different children growing up. Some of them might have sensory issues in their hearing. Yeah. Some of them might not, given you like heavy music and stuff. Did you get into like art, painting, or drawing?
Not so much these days, but as a child, I was physically quite uncoordinated, which actually probably made it harder for me to learn the instruments in some ways. Like, I remember I couldn't hold a pen properly until I was like 7 or 8 years old. I had to go to some special class, like one-on-one with somebody teaching me how to like be physically coordinated. Like, I have this vague memory of like throwing and catching balls with this medical specialist.
Is that an occupational therapist?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think it was an occupational therapist. But this was like when I was seven years old. Yeah.
Do you think that helped when you're starting to play instruments? Kind of when you're holding a pen, it's different when you're playing an instrument, right?
Because at that time I would have been learning piano, which is much
easier.
Well, physically easier. You know, it's not like a guitar where you know, there's a bit of physical kind of exertion sort of involved in that. I feel like if I tried to learn guitar at that age, actually, I probably wouldn't have really been able to stick to it because I would have been quite uncoordinated, but I grew out of it. So I feel like, I mean, I guess I still have elements of clumsiness, but it was a problem when I was like a young child, but it hasn't been a problem since.
How was it like for you learning instruments in terms of like guitar when you were on your journey learning guitar? When you were holding a pen, you cannot hold the pen, right?
Yeah.
So when you're starting to learn your guitar, what's the journey? Did it make it harder for you to learn guitar?
Probably. I'd say so. I mean, it's kind of hard for me to guess because I've only really known it the way that I've learned it, you know. Okay. But I'd say it probably was a slow journey. I mean, I can remember being in my, like, especially when I started like kind of playing in bands, and in my late teens, early 20s, I started getting into more extreme sort of technical sort of metal music, and like really wanting to kind of push myself and like learn, and just really struggling, not being able to do things that like I could see other people doing, like learning and picking up, and I kind of just could figure it out, but in very janky kind of ways, you know, like in ways that are probably not
standard.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I
kind of just assume everyone thinks I'm weird, you know. So, you know, like when we're sort of creatively working on stuff in the room, I feel like I can really connect and stuff, and like I can really sort of get into the zone and connect with people in that environment. And then it might be like, oh, let's go out, let's take a break, and then everyone starts talking about something else, and I'm kind of just sort of like, I don't know. Yeah. Like they'll be talking about something to do with, I don't know, sports or video games or something, and I'm just like, oh, I just want to get back and do the music. And, you know, like I lose the connection sometimes, right. You know. So
do you mask?
I think it's something that is sort of for a lot of my life was happening without me sort of consciously knowing that that's what I was doing. That's, I guess, going back to what I was saying before about reading up on autism and stuff. When I started to kind of make those connections, and then I learned about the concept of masking, and I sort of was like reading about it, I was like, oh, that's a bit strange. And then sort of thinking about it a bit more, I'm like, have I been doing this? Like, and I don't even notice that I've been doing that. And I don't know. I've spoken to a few people who are, you know, adult diagnosed autistic people, and who also say, you know, things like that, you know, they did that just almost as a subconscious sort of coping mechanism. And I continue to work in customer service, which is a challenging thing to do for, like, I work at the library. But, you know, you kind of just sort of, it's almost like a survival sort of instinct in a way. You know, you feel like, oh, you know, I have to keep doing this thing and I want to leave a good impression, I guess. I guess for me, leaving a good impression for other people is subconsciously quite important. So I guess that's where a lot of the masking stuff comes from, because it's like, oh, I have to kind of figure out how they're at. Like often, like, yeah, that's often a thing, is like, I'll sort of, for people I don't necessarily have that intuitive connection with, I find myself almost sort of copying their behaviors. Maybe not literally copying, like doing exactly what they're doing, but just sort of like picking up on subconsciously on the way of what they're doing, and then me thinking, oh, this is how I have to act around this person, you know, and
eventually you build up that skill, right?
Yeah. Although I think also, say it's someone I'm working with or I work with over a period of time, you know, they'll kind of get used to the way that I am and stuff, and maybe the mask may slightly wear away a little bit over time after I sort of have got past that point of being like, oh, I have to give a good impression, you know. I don't think it took me very long to kind of get used to it. Like, like I come across a lot of people, you know, like I hear a lot of people saying, oh, you know, playing in public, that's really makes me nervous. Or
anxious maybe.
Yeah. There's maybe some element of that, but for me, I feel as long as I sort of know what I'm doing, you know, or...
Your prep.
Yeah, I think that's the key. That's the key to that, is sort of being in control of what you're doing, or like you as a unit, you know, as a band. If you're prepared, then I feel like I'm totally comfortable. I feel like a lot of social scenarios, I do get very nervous, like talking to people, stuff. And I guess maybe part of that is because you don't know how a conversation's going to go with a person or a stranger or whatever, and that makes me nervous. But then playing a gig on stage, it's like, I know we've practiced the stuff, we know what we're going to do, and I'm totally at ease in that situation. So I feel like just to kind of slightly sidestep, like I was thinking, like, you know, if I'm having to talk in front of an audience, like not playing music, if I have to do it on the spot with no preparation, it's the most terrifying thing in the world. But then if I've prepared for that situation, then I'm totally fine.
Have you encountered anything similar like that? Like you're anxious because, I don't know, maybe you haven't prepared?
Yeah, no, there have been times for sure. Yeah.
How did you deal with that?
All you can really do is just get on with it. You know, like, I mean, there have been some disastrous times. I remember I was in one band where I was actually playing keyboards and I hadn't really done that in a band before, you know, even though I had that history and background in playing piano. And I had a bit of a strange setup that I was trying to wrangle, and we did a gig, and I just was not prepared, and like I hadn't got all my stuff all set up properly, but it was like, we got to play. And then the band starts playing and I'm basically having a panic attack on stage, you know, because, yeah, I feel like sometimes it just becomes like sort of, you know, so there's either going to be a fight or flight response. And like, I guess for me in that scenario, because I'm also very like, you know, I have a bit of pride as a musician, you know, I don't want to be seen as like incompetent. So I feel like, no, I have to just do the thing. I just have to keep going, you know, and whatever happens. And yeah, you know, in the moment it might seem like the most terrifying thing ever. But then, you know, here I'm sitting however many years later, and it's almost kind of funny to think back on, you know.
I was actually about to ask you that, but you answered it. Did you play any music with anyone who's neurodivergent as well that you're aware of?
I've got suspicions about certain people that, you know, like, you know, I'm not the kind of person that wants to kind of do the diagnose other people, but, you know, I feel, especially since I've had my diagnosis and I've read up on the traits and I have an understanding of neurodivergence and stuff, you start to notice those things in other people, you know, and there are definitely people I've worked with, like, that person probably probably is, you know.
Yeah, kind of in the...
Yeah. But it's not always obvious, you know. Yeah.
Like the masking thing, like, okay.
Yeah. There's one person who I was in a band with. I won't name it because I haven't had this conversation with this person, but like thinking back, I'm like, oh, that guy was definitely autistic. I don't think he knows to this day, but you know, or even thinks about it. But yeah.
With your Sighthound, so how did you make that music with Matt?
They're quite experimental, that project. Yeah. Okay, no, that was a really interesting project. We kind of, we opened for a few bands. Bongzilla was one, Conan, Weed Eater, Windhand, a lot of sludgy stoner doom sort of.
And if you are going to give advice to a kid or kids who are neurodivergent or autistic, what sort of advice would you give them if they wanted to go into that music path or art kind of path?
Just don't get too caught up on other people's concepts of rules, you know, or standards, you know, because they may not apply to you, even though you may think that that's what you're supposed to do, you know. I think often you might find that when you're following your own unique voice, that that's going to be much more fruitful and enjoyable, and you're probably going to come out with better stuff.
Any advice can you also give when it comes to anxiety or being anxious on stage? You've got a lot of experience on stage, and here you're still managing.
For me, being as prepared as possible is the best way to manage anxiety on stage. I mean, we're talking about music. For me, that's absolutely the most biggest. I'm not sure if this is the right way to answer this question, but I feel like just having that sort of intuitive ability to do this thing, having this intuitive ability to play music and write music and create music, whereas a lot of other things just seem confusing and perplexing in life. I feel like that's been the one grounding factor that I can sort of always come back to and keep doing, and it always makes sense to me, where a lot of other things may not make sense and be making me want to tear my hair out, you know. I feel like just being able to turn to music is always the enduring thing.
When life is confusing, you mentioned confusing, what do you usually do? What technique, strategies, how do you deal with it?
I turn into a hermit and will just blast records on the stereo.
One second.
Yeah, that's okay.
You know what happened here? It just went there. Right. Anyway.
Okay.
Okay, so you're talking about Leamy, Motorhead, is it?
No, that's the Stranglers.
Ah, okay,
yeah.
It's a different Leamy.
Oh, Let Me?
Ah, yeah, is that the one? Leamy.
Oh, Let Me. Yeah, Let Me. Yeah.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah,
I misheard it. I thought it's Leamy from Motorhead.
No.
So it's different. Like it's kind of like debunking. What you call that? Truth versus. I forgot the term. Okay, all right. With your sound, what does that? Your project sound?
Sighthound.
Sighthound.
Yeah. There's so many misconceptions. A neurodevelopmental.